So let's talk about hydrogen a little bit first, then we'll come back to algae. FiRe started 10 years ago, as we've heard, and I was not here then, but I would guess it's possible that they talked about the hydrogen economy. 10 years ago, Jeremy Rifkin was writing his book, The Hydrogen Economy. Hydrogen fuel cells were assumed to be a very significant part of the automobile future. The automobile at General Motors was called the Hiemstra, which was a fuel cell car. There was big support from both the Clinton and Bush administrations for the idea of a hydrogen economy. And the governor of California, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, envisioned the hydrogen highway here in California. What happened to the hydrogen future?
Well, I think that people forgot that there are, I believe it's 800 quadrillion gallons of water in the ocean, and you can't boil them all. And I think that that was just too tough a problem to tackle. So rather than concentrate on making hydrogen as a useful fuel and for making semiconductors, for industrial cleaning, for all sorts of things that people can use and have used hydrogen for, they decided to tackle an excessively complicated systems integration project where most of the underlying technologies hadn't been invented yet, and it's just plain too tough. So what we decided to do is to say, okay, that's real good, and other people are making great progress now in fuel cells, and those fuel cells all need hydrogen, and we'll be delighted to be the supplier of that hydrogen. But we are not trying to boil the ocean. It's just too big for a little company. And I think that a lot of people just were mesmerized by the potential and forgot that you can't go 1, 2, 3 infinity.
And in fact, your target is initially really not vehicles and so much. Well, your target is just producing the hydrogen, but your anticipated uses or market for that is really not so much the transportation infrastructure or the heating infrastructure. It's other places.
Well, not initially is I think, the best way of saying. However, there are, even in those areas, some really neat applications that are quite practical. For example, I understand that there's something like 50,000 lives that are lost every year in poor countries where people get burned from kerosene space heaters. Now, we can very, very practically make a portable space heater powered by hydrogen from our aluminum pellets that will both provide heat. One of the things that happens in the reaction is you get 50% heat and 50% hydrogen. So you can use the hydrogen for cooking, you can use the hydrogen for, you can use the heat for heating water and for heating in the winter and whatever. You can use a heat exchanger and use it for cooling. And and that's really something that can be done cost effectively. It's small. It doesn't require going through 1,000 government agencies and spending years of integration with other things and so on. And so that's what we're really going to try and do. We're going to try and find those places where we can have ready-to-develop products, make reference products, and then partner with different people in different parts of the world that have the domain expertise and ways of getting it to the market. We're really taking a very practical approach. I want to, I'm getting old, and I want to see this company be big and successful in my lifetime. I'm not I mean, it's very nice to plant carob trees, which take 70 years to grow and give fruit for your grandchildren, but I'd like to see some fruit in my lifetime. I'd also like to make fruit for my grandchildren.
Okay. Let's talk about algae then, just for a little bit. David was telling us backstage that, and I missed this, that President Obama mentioned algae in a recent speech, apparently in Florida, and people laughed as he included that as part of the future picture. Why do people laugh? What's your experience with that? And I really wanted to know, kind of give us some applications from algae, kind of as you're in your company, and more generally as you see algae is going to be applied here, and then here, and then here, kind of in order of sequence of where it's going to be most useful or have the best market first.
All right, so let me try to answer the Obama question first, then I'll break it down chronologically on the algae development phases. First with Obama, look, he got stuck in the middle of a bipartisan fight, and he came out there and said that we could fuel our cars with algae, and I think enough of the market either doesn't know anything about algae or knows enough to know that it's very far down the road before we're actually fueling vehicles with algae oil, 5, 10 years down the road. So from a government politics perspective, it was just I wish he didn't say it, frankly, because it only adds more credibility issues to our industry. We don't count on the government. I've been in the renewable energy space for about 12 years, energy space for 20 years, and I've just learned to not count on the government for anything. I don't think they'll ever get it right. The only thing that would ever help our industry develop sustainable technologies is a long-term policy, and they just don't think that way. And it's only gotten worse in the last 4 years. So to bring it up in a presidential election year is probably very poor timing. The second question regarding the chronological steps to algae development, at least in our perspective as a company, is you want to start on the higher value ends. That's why we put transportation fuels, jet fuels, diesel, all these things we make every day at our facility, but we aren't going to make them at cost, market cost. And our business concept is $80 barrel oil. If we have to produce fuel at the base rate of $80 barrel oil equivalent, and if we can't, we're not going to go into that market. But what we can do is chase products that are out there today that have higher value. And those examples of products chronologically in our perspective are fertilizer, food and feeds, aquaculture feeds, cattle feeds, poultry and hogs. Those things are happening right now. Dog foods, dog and cat foods. Obviously with our investors, we do have insight others probably don't have readily available. But as well, you'll see pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals. I just saw for my first time yesterday at CVS. I live in a small town in Colorado, so I don't get to these big drugstores very often. I was at CVS here in Laguna, and they're selling an algae oil-based omega-3. Well, that's excellent to see, because the way we get omega-3s right now is through fish oil, and the only way you get fish oil is by crushing small fish, which is completely unsustainable. You cannot continue to do that. So to actually see that coming on the market, it's a market that's expanding. The fish get the omega-3s from eating algae. Mm-hmm. We're just taking out the middle fish. So it's an important step that's coming. These markets are going to open up, and that's what I see in the short term. I'm talking the next 3 years. This is happening. I'm watching it. Fertilizers are going out there. You're going to see aquaculture feeds change. Think about the aquaculture market. I think it was Craig Ventnor was talking about it. That salmon, and this is true because we're testing salmon at our site. We're doing these feed trials. Salmon that eat soybean and corn for protein do not have the same protein amino acid profile as the salmon that you get when you catch one in Alaska. So pretty soon, your protein content that you're getting off the salmon, which is supposed to be your safer protein, is not going to be that much better than eating a piece of beef. You might have a lower fat content, but the actual amino acid profile, the nutrients you need, aren't going to be there. So you need to find these other technologies. They take time, but chronologically, that's what I buy. I'll take the fertilizer. And we're doing it. We're selling fertilizer. We are selling omega-3s, and we are selling feeds.
And in the meantime, people need to buy salmon that's in the wild.
Yeah.
There's a transition, and all this stuff takes time. And that's the problem with both hydrogen and algae and any of these sustainable technologies, man. These things take time.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the things that you did when you were up here as a fire starter is that you ran very quickly by your financial backing from the Mars family, Mars company, and mentioned that they take a very long-term view, 25 and 100 years, which was pretty impressive. And I think you mentioned that they see 4 major areas of interest for them, and I wondered if you would repeat those.
All right, so what they do in these periods, about every 10 years, they get together and ask large questions about what happens in a 25-year or 100-year look ahead, because they're looking at a $30 billion a year enterprise that sells globally, 70 countries, and how do they continue that growth that they've seen over the last 20 years? So their question in 2006 was, one, how do you feed 9 billion people? Because that's coming. I mean, we're not going to stop that. There's going to be 9 billion people out there. There's 7 today. The other thing is, I believe, as well as the Mars family believes, we've already passed a tipping point. I mean, what Jim was saying last night, my wife and I went back to the room, he was so right. It's so obvious, and he's giving us illustrative examples of it. It just amazes me that not more of this world, and I don't mean to be preaching here, so forgive me, but that more people don't recognize that. People aren't acting upon it. But anyway, the question was, how do you diminish the amount of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere? We are past the tipping point. We have affected our environment, okay? It's just how much farther are we going to go? And then the third question was water resources, potable water, okay? There's a lot of water, but potable water, there isn't. It's not everywhere you need it. So how do you manage water resources for industry and people? And then the fourth wrap-up question to that is, it is human nature to want to expand macroeconomically. Every country in the world wants to improve their economy. Everybody wants to improve their lifestyle, their quality of life for their children and their children's children. How do you do that sustainably? Because we're not doing it today. And more people need to understand that. So those were the 4 big ones.
By the way, to avoid being smacked by Jerry when I get off the stage, Jerry is always reminding me that one of the things about our process is that it produces ultra-pure water as a byproduct. And harnessing that byproduct, our process uses a fair amount of water, but it's perfectly happy to use saline water, and what will come out of it is ultra-pure water. So potable drinking water of the highest caliber, actually, it'll be the best kind of water that you can buy, like Fiji water. So that's another area that we hope to go after as well. And I think the approach has to be to get these things off the ground is to find small products that you can get to market quickly, make revenue, show people what the possibilities are, and then partner with bigger companies to get to the next place.
That's great. For everybody in the audience, we have not quite 7 minutes, or a little over 7 minutes left. So we're going to invite some questions, which is, I know it's been hard to get to in a lot of our panels. So if you have questions about hydrogen and about algae and that whole picture, go ahead and head to the microphones now. I'm going to ask about one or two more, and then we'll have a little bit of time for that, because I'm sure you have some. David, I don't know if you saw this yesterday. Procter & Gamble made an announcement that they are converting some forklifts to hydrogen fuel cells. It's only 3 forklifts at 3 sites, but I wondered if that's a turning point in.
Well, it's clear that the world woke up. You know, on our website, which is called WoodallTech.com, there is a section called News, and that news is just industry news about hydrogen. And every day we have various bots that find stories about what's going on, and we cull those and put them up, and you will see there about hydrogen lawnmowers, hydrogen forklifts, all of that kind of technology, hydrogen buses. People are experimenting with these things. They are trying to get them to work. Unfortunately, almost all of the hydrogen that is going into all of those things is made from filth. So we are aiming to replace that part of it, but it is good to see that people are developing hydrogen-based transportation technology.
Okay, I know we have one at that microphone, and then we'll come over here to Mr. Anderson. We'll start over here.
Hi, it's Simon Hackett. The question I've got is about the hydrogen side of this. And this is obviously a question you must get a lot, David. by using aluminum to split the hydrogen out of water, you are moving the energy-intense part of the process back into the aluminum. Obviously, aluminum takes an awful lot of electrical power to pull out as a pure metal in most of the production processes that are used. You mentioned that you're using scrap aluminum, and that's actually quite a smart way to take that embedded energy and turn it into your process. But how much is there enough of that to do to use scrap aluminum for this process? Because if you've got to create aluminum for this process, the energy intensity just got moved down the supply chain.
Your question is excellent. The answer is, sadly, there's a total overabundance of scrap aluminum that people don't know what to do with, and most of it ends up just getting buried. It's a really sad story. Now, I want to be 100% honest here. Right now, what we are using is essentially first-grade scrap. That means if somebody wants to machine a part from virgin aluminum and they're left with other stuff, whatever they're left with, that scrap aluminum, we're buying that. To be able to recycle cans needs a little bit, or what's called post-consumer waste, is a little bit of extra work because, unfortunately, long-term, we're going to have to work with the industry to develop better varnishes that can be more easily de-varnished or de-decorated. The industry calls, the term for printing on cans is called decorating, and the decorated cans are what people want to see, and that's great, but you know, Sun Chemical in particular is one entity that has already figured out, made a lot of progress in using vegetable-based inks. And hopefully we will help, and all of you can help, to move the consciousness of the industry so that people will just be using those kinds of cans, and then they're very, very easily recyclable, and that's good for us and good for everybody else. Right now, it's just shocking how much aluminum that's perfectly good and was drunk once just gets wasted because of the problem of recycling it.
So just a really brief follow-up question to that, because it's a really cool thing you've said. It means you're actually recycling the embedded energy in the aluminum, which is actually kind of cool. That's great. The brief question is, so what happens to the aluminum after you've finished with your process? What do you then do with it?
Well, that's an excellent question, and we have an unexpected answer to that question. We originally believed that the only thing we could do with the waste product, which is aluminum hydroxide, is to take the aluminum hydroxide and smelt it down to aluminum. Now, obviously, that means you are giving back a certain amount of the energy because smelting is an expensive process. Now, what we first started to do is we looked at the fact that there's a certain amount, believe it or not, of free energy which is available. For example, I discovered that in Oregon, where they have these massive hydraulic water plants, they overproduce in certain hours of the day. And that energy actually gets wasted. They try shipping it to Los Angeles and other places like that. There are enormous costs and transmission losses and whatever. So our initial thought was that what we were going to do was to take the, put a smelting plant in a place, or in places where they have that kind of essentially free energy, operate it in off hours or using solar technology or other techniques where we wouldn't have to pay for the recycling. But then, in the short term, Professor Woodall made a fascinating discovery, and that is, if you take the aluminum hydroxide, our aluminum hydroxide, and you just heat it a little bit, you boil off the water, now you're left with ultra-pure aluminum oxide. That has many, many uses. It's used in pharmaceuticals, it is used in making of semiconductors, And in the near term, we actually get an exceedingly valuable product that all we need to do. By the way, one of the interesting things about aluminum oxide is a very, very hard substance. Other than diamond, it's the second hardest substance known. Now, the beautiful thing about our process is it already comes out as a powder. All of the applications that use aluminum oxide use it as powder, and we actually produce it as powder. So that was an unanticipated benefit. It caused us to totally revise our short-term economic model, and we actually said, okay, we're going to push out for the future the questions of the recycling, because right now, everything we can make, we can just have two products coming out the door, hydrogen and aluminum oxide. And one of the nice things is that since our initial customers are all in the semiconductor business and they're big users of aluminum oxide, we're selling to the same people.
Let me get to the other question. We had one more question right here.
Quick question for Dan. I keep hearing people talk about hydrogen from algae. Is there anything to that?
We have a couple scientists who have done some research projects on it. One's written a white paper, but we are not targeting that effort. Our challenge right now is staying focused.
Thank you.
Okay, well, the panel's been from carbon to carbon. And if you're interested in answers to decarbonizing, you remember the presentations from the filmmaker Peter Bick and his film Carbonation. He asked if I'd remind you there are free copies of that film on the registration table outside the door. So if you haven't seen it and that's one you'd like to pick up, it's there for your taking. Thank you to the two panelists, and thank you to all. Have a good lunch.
Thank you.